So remember that time I made like a whole video talking about David Mitchell because I had just gotten in like an author rut and had just been reading David Mitchell books for a while? Yeah, that is what this is about to be. Welcome to Pages and Pages. The first David Mitchell book I ever read was The Bone Clocks, which I picked up because I thought it was a sci-fi book, which it was. But what got me was the beautiful words he used and how often I had to look up words, which is something that I don't have to do often enough, I feel. So it was really exciting to me when I finally read a book where I didn't know all of the words in it and I had to go look them up. I love words, and he uses good ones. This book reminded me of A Wrinkle in Time in a lot of ways, but it had a lot more religious overtones, which I found to be a powerful method of storytelling, and I always really appreciate it when sci-fi tackles religion. I think it makes the piece a lot stronger, incorporating both the scientific side of things and the spiritual side of things. So that's an aspect of this that originally caught my attention and alerted me to the glory of David Mitchell's writing. So, moving on. And now I've inadvertently convinced my whole book group they need to read it, which, oops, I don't know. It's not the most accessible book, and now I'm having questions whether that was good, but I can't stop talking about it and thinking about it. This has one of the most interesting structures of a book that I've ever read, and it turns out that this structure is actually kind of the pinnacle of David Mitchell's story structures from some of his earlier works. What I really appreciate about this one was the way that he could step into any voice so easily and just completely sell a character just by changing the way that he writes, the diction and the story, and oh, it was just beautiful. Underlined a lot of things. I'm still thinking about a lot of things. One of my favorite things from this book is he kind of has one of his characters scoff and say as if art is the what and not the how. And that just struck such a chord in me because there is nothing new under the sun. All of the original ideas have already been thought, and so our role as humans and as creators comes in how we do things, not what we do necessarily, because it's all already been done. So originality is kind of a futile pursuit in that regard, but in the how, there's never been another me before. And so the way I do things, the how of how I do things, is going to be unique. And so I can really rest in that thought a lot, and I appreciated that. It was kind of, I don't know, one of those depressing but super encouraging quotes. Another quote from this book that I really have been holding on to and thinking about is, "Freedom is the fatuous jingle of our civilization, but only those deprived of it have the barest inkling of what it is." And that, oh man, that struck a chord too. I always am interested in defining and redefining words, and he does that very well. He takes concepts that we think we know what they mean and he just turns them on their head and makes us question them. And so I think it's really important to think, especially in America, what we call the free world, what is freedom? Because I think often we lose sight of what it is when we actually have so much of it, and he gets that and he said it in a beautiful way. So I've been mulling that over. So that is something that I took away from Cloud Atlas and wanted to share. Cloud Atlas might be in my top 10 books. Ghostwritten is an interesting novel. David Mitchell again uses the short story method where he tells the story from a bunch of different characters' point of view, and you get kind of this pieced together kind of story. What was interesting about this book is that I kind of felt like the main character never actually had a story in it. Like, the whole story is about this main character, but it's interesting because you're getting it from so many different perspectives, and in each of them you have this main character that's kind of there, but they're kind of not there, and so that's why it's called Ghostwritten, obviously. What was so interesting about this one was the way he captured that presence without actually writing from that perspective, if that makes sense. This one was very metaphysical. Like, what is a soul? And can artificial intelligence have souls? Or are souls what is capable of love? What is love? What is intelligence's relationship to the soul? So all of that in this book, and again, it spans a lot of cultures in this book too, and that's kind of neat. I appreciate that about his writing. David Mitchell spent part of his young adult life living in Japan, and so you get kind of a really cool Eastern element into his books, but at the same time you get a lot of Western elements, so you have these like competing spiritualities, but you also have science and technology, so is it sci-fi or is it spiritual? I don't know, but I love it. This book also included characters that showed up in Cloud Atlas, so it was interesting to see how that kind of thought process developed for him, and how those characters have multiple dimensions. I don't know if I would say they're the same characters as in Cloud Atlas, but certainly they have the same origins. They serve a different function in this book than they do in Cloud Atlas, and I think in Cloud Atlas you get some more development out of them, but in this one you're getting their original forms. So that's interesting, seeing the same characters show up in two standalone novels rather than as a series. This could take place in the same world as Cloud Atlas. Number 9 Dream is very weird. I kept getting it mixed up with Murakami because it does take place in Japan and it has a lot of mystical elements, kind of fusing reality with dreams, so you're never quite sure whether what's happening is real or if it's a hallucination, and that was kind of fun to read, just to piece apart and to try to figure out what's actually happening. There were some great images in here. I think my favorite one came towards the end. You have the main character, and towards the end of the book he's like riding a bus and he meets this old woman who offers him a persimmon. Well, the book kind of implies that she's a witch, and that image is so interesting of like the fates intervening and offering fruit and all of that. So you can see that there's a lot going on in these books. This one was really sad though. This one had a sad ending. It's confusing, but not in the way that like the Bone Clocks was confusing, which maybe that was the point, because it's supposed to be kind of a dream sequence, kind of a reality sequence. Like maybe the point was that it was a little unclear. It was a Booker Prize finalist. So that's Number 9 Dream. The David Mitchell book I just finished was The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet. This book again takes place in Japan, but it's the Japan of the past at the end of the feudal system, ushering in the beginning of like commerce and trade and imperialism with Britain and the Netherlands, actually. This book had a ton of research involved. I can tell because I didn't know any of that happened, but now I do. He has a really keen understanding of the whole time period that was happening, so that was kind of interesting to read, like an intense historical fiction. Again, you have interesting cult religious themes throughout. There's a bit of a love story. I would say this one is primarily a love story. This is like a historical fiction romance, maybe? Maybe that's what I love about David Mitchell so much, is that he just doesn't fit into any of our genre categories. It is also interesting the way that he was very aware of language in this book, because you have a whole slew of different languages intersecting in this book. While the whole thing is written in English, you get different flavors of English depending on which perspective you're hearing from. That shows a really sensitive author who's capable of seeing the way that culture and language go together, and that is just amazing. So often you get these authors who are so embedded in their own language and their own culture that you can't, they're kind of stuck. Even when they're trying to write other cultures, you get kind of a consistent culture throughout because of the author's original mother tongue. So an example of that, let's go with Lord of the Rings. Even though Tolkien is a linguist and is writing these languages, creating these cultures, what you actually end up getting out of Lord of the Rings is kind of a general European medieval sort of culture. Even though you have these different myths and stories, it still feels very European. But this one, I don't know, he has a way of adding a nuance to that. So my battery died after that. But those are my thoughts on all of David Mitchell's works. I really appreciate him as an author. I think it's marvelous the way he defies genre, and marvelous the way that he crafts words into beautiful sentences and structures, and it's just so lovely to read his book. So as you can see, I kind of got stuck in a David Mitchell author rut, but I think it's time to move on. He has other books. And one day I will read those too. But for the time being, I just really appreciate what he's done, and I've really enjoyed getting to read all of these fabulous books. And I would really recommend him as an author. I'm curious though what authors that you've gotten stuck in a rut with, where you just can't put them down and you keep trying to read everything they've ever written. So go ahead and let me know what you think of David Mitchell if you've read any of his books. Which one's your favorite? Maybe it's not one of the ones that I read, but maybe it's another one. But David Mitchell's really great, so look at him on the back looking all whatever that is. That's it for today. I hope you have a beautiful, lovely day, and I will talk to you next time. Happy reading!